Well, hello, everyone. I think that we are live now. And so I'm so grateful that you chose to join me either this afternoon or this morning, or if you're around the world this evening, just for this webinar for specifically for families who are using the Foundation Worldview curriculums. I'm so excited for this time together because normally when I do a webinar, it's with people all around the world and they may be foundation users or not foundation users, but it's so exciting to get to connect with and interact with those of you who are using the curriculum day in and day out with your kids. So thank you for coming. This webinar specifically is for families who are using this as a family discipleship tool. So not specifically for homeschooling families. We're going to later on today have a webinar specifically for homeschooling families, but for those of you who are using it, who are just really have a heart for discipling your kids and for helping them understand the truth of the Christian worldview and how to navigate all of the different things that we find in culture. So now just as some quick housekeeping, I assume that because you're using the curriculum that most of you have already been introduced to me through the videos in the material, because I'm the one that does the teaching, both for the instructor videos, just giving you the heads up on what's coming up in a lesson, as well as the videos that you're taking your children through. But I know some of you I haven't met personally. And so for those of you I haven't met personally, I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm Elizabeth Urbanowicz. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time just looking at how can you make the most of your foundation family license. And then at the end, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a good portion of time just answering your questions. So any questions that you may have about implementing the materials in your home. So if you look on the little sidebar here, we have a questions tab. And so if you just want to put your questions in there, I'll get to them towards the second half of this webinar. If you're feeling shy about asking a question, just know if you go in the questions bar and there's no other questions there, that's because only you will be able to see your question. And they're not going to go just in a general chat. So only you will be able to see it, and it will get shuffled over to me so that I can answer that. Now, you also may not have a question, but you may have an interesting situation that's come up or something else, a way that you've used Foundation and maybe in an unconventional way, and you have a little story that you'd like to share, you're more than welcome to type that out in the questions, and then I'll read through that and share that with others towards the second half of this webinar. Now, the reason that I'm doing this today is just because I know that anytime I actually invest financially in something, and also time-wise, I want to make sure that I am making a wise investment. And so with the way that we've designed the Foundation Worldview curriculums, we've designed them so that we hope that they're fairly intuitive and they give you good instructions for how to actually implement these materials in your homes. But there can always be more ways to utilize the product. I just recently moved and purchased my first home. And those of you who have purchased your first home before know that there's so many new things that you need to get. And one of those new things was a vacuum cleaner. And I did a lot of research, and I knew that I wanted a certain type of Dyson vacuum cleaner. I had done my homework, and then I started utilizing the vacuum, and I loved it. But then I thought, you know what? I bet there's probably more things that this machine does than even how I'm utilizing it. So I dug a little bit further, and I did research, and I watched certain how-to videos, and I discovered that I can use certain attachments on my Dyson to dust my blinds. Now, I don't know about you, but dusting blinds is not something that I do very often. But when I do, it's such a pain because there's all those individual blinds. So I watched a video, and I learned that this machine that I had been using to get the dirt off of my carpets and off of my hardwood could also be used to get the dust off of my blinds. And I used it that way after watching the video, and I was just floored because it went so quickly. It was so painless, so easy. And so that's really what this webinar is about. Just taking this tool that you already have, that you've already invested finances and time into, and just looking at, okay, what are some different things that we can do to really make the most out of this? So the first thing just want to go through is something that's probably pretty intuitive, but just if you haven't figured this out already, that one of the best way really that we recommend implementing the Foundation Worldview curriculums at home is to use them once per week. We've tried to make it super manageable for you so that there's 27 lessons in the first one in the comparative worldview curriculum, and then there's 30 lessons in the second one in the careful thinking one. And so if you do the math, there's generally 40 weeks in a school year, give or take a few weeks, and then you have some breaks and some vacations. So we've tried to make it really manageable so that you can implement it during one school year. Now, the reason that we say once a week is not only because we know you're really busy already and you don't have time to be doing something extra 5 days a week, but also we want to actually transform the way that your kids think about everything. So if we implement one lesson once per week and then spend the whole rest of that week looking at, where do I find this concept in real life? It actually gives your kids and you as a family the opportunity to think through, where do I see this worldview issue? Or where do I see this type of claim found in everyday life? So that you can start to see that in your kids' homework, in their textbooks, in the TikTok videos that they're watching, in the songs on the radio, in conversations you have at church, in your neighborhood, so that you see these things all around you. And so once per week, we have some families that implement it. They choose one school night per week and they implement the lesson then. Others choose either a Saturday or a Sunday, just one day over the weekend. And then the goal is that the conversations will continue, that whatever you've worked on that week, you can continue those conversations in your home. If you're working on the first unit, on truth, both of the curriculums focus on truth in the first unit, to just have everyday conversations with your kids. When something pops up on TV, hey, what that person just said, is that something that's either true or false? Or is that just a personal, subjective feeling? To be able to have that conversation, or around the dinner table, to be able to talk about conversations that you heard throughout the day. And hey, I heard this person say this, and they said it as if it were something that were just true for everybody. But actually, that's just a personal, subjective feeling. So that's the goal. That's why we have it, so that you have one lesson per week. One thing that is really an advantage, one thing that I love about you using a family license, is that you are just working with either one child or a small group of children. So what you have is such a tremendous advantage over larger groups, because if you've been on our website, you know that our curriculums were designed to be able to be used in the home or at church or in school. So you've probably noticed that the language that we use is a lot of teacher, class, classmate. And the reason for that is in the videos, it's a lot less strange for your child to think of you as his or her teacher than it would be for a child in a school to think of the teacher as mom or dad, grandpa or grandma. And so we know that there's some of the activities in there that might require more than one child or a few children. So what we're going to talk about now is just some simple ways to modify some of the activities that we give. Like if we're saying turn and talk to a partner, and you're just working on this with just one child, you're going to be the child's partner. Okay. And give them an opportunity to speak first. Give them an opportunity to share their thoughts first, so that you're hearing their thoughts before they're hearing yours. But if you're saying, this kind of feels awkward that I'm my only child's partner, just take it as an opportunity to continue building that relationship with your son or your daughter or your grandson or your granddaughter or niece or nephew, whoever it is that you're working with, that you have this relational building opportunity, and you have this opportunity to really hear what's going on inside their heart and their mind, what they're thinking of, what they understand, what they don't understand. And we know there's other places in the curriculum where we ask the children to draw a picture, to summarize something, and then present it to the class. Now, obviously, if you're just working with a few kids or just one child, you might not choose to have them stand up and present their poster to you. That could still be a really great thing to do, because it's practicing their ability to speak publicly, which is a really important skill to have. But you could also, instead of just having them get up and present it, you could just have it laid out on the table, okay, and say, okay, I want you to explain this to me. How does this summarize the concept that was just covered? And have them explain it to you. It doesn't need to be a formal presentation for this, but we've tried to create all of the activities in the curriculum so that they can be adaptable, whether someone is teaching a class of 25 children or whether they just have one child at home working on the island in the kitchen on these lessons. And I just want to reiterate again that the fact that you are going through this with your family, so just a small group of children, or maybe even just one child, your children are going to reap the benefits from that because your attention is not distracted on 20 to 30 different children. You're able to really invest time just focusing on those kids that God has placed in your care. So you have a tremendous advantage there. Now, another thing that I really always tell people is something that's so valuable to do when you're implementing one of these curriculums is to make sure that you're intentional about having conversations throughout the week about what was learned in the lesson. Now, you'll start to see probably around Unit 3, whether you're working on the comparative worldview or the careful thinking curriculum, around Unit 3, the children you're working with are going to start having these conversations naturally because things are just going to come up and they're going to recognize, oh my goodness, like the first time I went through the careful thinking materials with a student that I was tutoring, it was during a presidential election. And the student, we had just gone over in Unit 3 when it was talking about focusing on someone's character rather than the truth of his or her claim. So focusing on character rather than the truth of a claim being made. And the boy that I was working with said, oh my goodness, I listened to the presidential debate last night and all they focused on was character. They never talked about the truth of what this person was claiming. And so these conversations will start to happen naturally, but you can foster them and help them happen more quickly by asking your child or your children intentional questions. For example, if you're going through the comparative worldview curriculum and you're going through the unit on what it means to be human, you can ask your child if when he or she comes home with history homework, okay, or they just read a book in history to say, when you studied that historical figure, what kind of decisions did he make? Or what kind of decisions did she make? Interesting. That's very interesting. So what do you think about that historical figure's view of people? What do you think he or what do you think she thinks that it means to be human? And so by asking these questions, you're taking the foundation, no pun intended, that you're setting in the Foundation Worldview curriculums, and you are then applying that or modeling how to apply that in every area of life with your child. Or when you go through Unit 2 on different objects of worship in worldviews, you can ask your child, let's think about different subjects that you study in school. Have you seen any of these different objects of worship present in these different areas of study? Okay, and think about someone who is studying literature. In some literature classes, our children are going to be told, you know what? It doesn't matter what the author meant when he or she wrote this. What matters is what you think it means. So tell us what you think it means. Okay, and that's just the postmodern view that we can't know truth, that we bring our own truth to the table so we can help make these connections for our kids. When you go through that first worldview curriculum, the comparative worldview curriculum, I hope that your children just start naturally to pick up on these things in the media. That's why we include media clips. But again, if you're having a family movie night or if your child is watching a show on on Disney Plus or some other app, just making sure that you're there and you're present so that you can have these conversation so that they get excited about starting to evaluate things. This was one thing the first time I taught Foundation Comparative Worldview curriculum with my own students in my classroom, that moms started calling me and saying, my son wants to pause family movie night and evaluate the character's worldview. And the moms were asking for help doing that, but it's so exciting. So if we can kind of just encourage some of those questions by asking them intentionally, we'll soon see our children start to pick up on them. Now, if you're going through the second curriculum, if you're going through the careful thinking curriculum, you can ask specific questions about the different concepts learned in that as well. For example, in Unit 2 of the careful thinking curriculum, your children learn about the law of non-contradiction, okay, that a claim can't be true and false at the same time and in the same way. And so this is when you can start to ask, have you heard anybody say something where they're claiming that two opposite things are true? Or have you seen anybody live in a way that claims that two opposite things are true? For example, when somebody says that judging is wrong or it's wrong to judge, Think about that. Your child has probably heard that a lot, whether it's on television, whether it's just at school, whether it's with friends. And by saying it's wrong to judge, that person is making a judgment about judging. So that person's saying it's not okay to judge, but it's okay for me to judge about judging. So it's either okay to judge or it's not okay to judge. So that statement breaks the law of non-contradiction. Or you can look, when you get to Unit 3 of the Careful Thinking curriculum, goes through a lot of different mistakes in careful thinking. And one of them is just appealing to someone's emotions. So trying to get someone to feel a certain way without offering any evidence for a claim. And we find this all around us, where people say things that are trying to manipulate how we feel rather than providing any evidence for this. Okay, so this is a great thing to ask our kids. Have you heard anybody say anything, or have you seen any commercials, or have you seen any TikTok videos where someone is just trying to get you to feel a certain way without offering any evidence for why what they're saying is true? Different commercials are great examples of this. The commercials all of the time are trying to manipulate our emotions so that we will then go and invest in whatever product is being sold by that commercial. Okay, people that are on TikTok that are speaking really emotionally and with a lot of passion about things. Passion is contagious. It is. But sometimes, many times, passion doesn't align with what is true. So I just encourage you, just with whatever lesson you're working on, make it just an intentional point once or twice throughout that week to ask your child where he or she has seen examples of what you've learned in real life. Again, that's going back to the fact that's why we just have one lesson per week, because we want to offer you that opportunity to have that dialogue. Because the whole purpose of this is not just to check some boxes and say, oh, great, we've done Foundation Comparative Worldview curriculum, or oh, great, we've done Foundation Careful Thinking curriculum. If your child goes through it and isn't transformed, what's the point of that? The whole point is the way that we structured everything is to transform the way that they think. So we just really encourage you to have those conversations throughout the week. Now, this is just a reminder. I know some of you joined a little bit later, that in a few minutes, we're actually going to wrap up the time where I'm giving you tips and tricks for making the most of your foundation curriculum. And what we're going to do is we're going to get into a time of your questions. So if you go to the little questions bar, if you have any questions about either anything I've said or anything that you've encountered as you've been using the materials, please ask them there. Again, only you will be able to see your questions, so don't feel shy about asking them, because you'll put them there and then they'll go directly to me. And then the other thing is, if you have stories, a story from a time you were going through a foundation lesson and you want to share that, or you have an interesting situation or something that was kind of out of the ordinary and you'd like to share that, please feel free to share that in the questions box as well. Just two more things that I want to go over. The first one is something, if you're just at the beginning of either one of those two curriculums, the Comparative Worldview or the Careful Thinking, you might not have noticed this yet, but if you're in Unit 2 or beyond, you've probably noticed that we do a lot of review. Okay, there may be some times where you're thinking, oh my gosh, can I just skip over this part? We've gone over this like 6 times already. Well, as I've mentioned before, the goal is transformation. The goal is transformation. We want what you cover in Foundation Comparative Worldview curriculum or Foundation Careful Thinking curriculum to last not only this year, not only next year, but all throughout adulthood. And review is a key part of that. And we know sometimes it might feel like pulling teeth, it might feel boring, but it's really important because brain researchers have found that on average, a child needs between 5 to 7 exposures to the same content in order for it to really become part of their thinking patterns, to really stick and become part of who they are and how they process the world around them. They need 5 to 7 exposures to that content. So that is why we review over and over and over and over again, because we want it to stick. And I've seen this even with my own students who I took through this material almost 10 years ago now. I had a student who was just graduating from high school last year, and we bumped into one another just in the community. And she said, "Miss you, I still remember like everything that we learned in that comparative worldview class." And she started rattling things off and explaining how they helped her evaluate things in her different high school classes and different situations that she was in. And that is what we want. So please don't skip over the review parts. If your child complains about them, in the careful thinking curriculum, we actually explain this to the kids. We actually explain in the videos, this is why we're doing so much review. This is how God designed your brain to work. But if you're not on one of the lessons that explains that, or if you're in the comparative worldview curriculum where we don't explain that so much, feel free to even explain that to your child, that that's why we're reviewing over and over and over and over again. It's not because we don't have anything better to do, but it's because this is how God designed their brains to learn. And we don't want this to be just something that we do one year, just this random family discipleship thing that we do. We want it to be something that lasts and that sticks with them into adulthood. The second thing is since you're doing this in a family discipleship context, one thing that might seem a little bit strange is that at the end of every lesson, as you know, we have a know it and show it section. And then at the end of every unit, we have a test. So both of those are assessments. The first one, the know it and show it, is really an informal or a formative assessment. And the second one, the tests, are actually a formal or a summative assessment. Now, the reason that we've included these even in your family license is because we want you to know what your child understands and what he doesn't or what she doesn't at the end of every lesson. Because if you just went through a lesson, okay, let's say that you're going through the careful thinking curriculum and you're going through a lesson on just appealing to emotions and how that's a mistake in careful thinking. If you go through the know it and show it sheet and you realize, whoa, my son does not understand what this concept is at all, that gives you the clue that you should then either go through that lesson again, or you should continue this conversation with your son until he understands it, because each lesson is specifically designed to build upon the next. And so if one of your children or the only child you're working with doesn't understand one of the lessons, you don't want to just move on and think, oh, well, too bad they didn't get it. No, we want to transform thinking. So that's why we've included the know it and show it at the end of every lesson. And then why we've included the tests at the end of every unit. Now, we know that that's something that's kind of strange to be doing in a family discipleship setting, but it's really beneficial for you as the parent. If you're thinking, I don't want to sit down and give my child a test at the end of every unit, you don't need to do that, but you can even just go over the questions as a family to talk through them. If you don't want to sit down and give a formal test, just talk through the questions as a family and give your child or your children an opportunity to respond so that you're really getting a clear picture of what do they understand, what do they not understand. And it's just so exciting when we can see, oh my goodness, look at how much my child has learned. Or if you go through an assessment at the end, even if you're just talking through it as family and you're thinking, oh my goodness, my child got so very little out of it. Now that's not encouraging, but the encouraging thing is you know that. You know that you're not deceived into believing, oh, we've gone through this, my child knows it all. No, you know that your child hasn't understood what he or she was supposed to understand by the end of that unit. So you can pause and go through it again. Again, that's why we just have 27 or 30 lessons, so that you actually have the time to go back and cover something again if your child didn't get it the first time around. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our time of Q&A. So again, if you have a question, please make sure that you put it in the questions bar so that I can get to it. Okay, so the first one says, we have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. We are struggling with our younger one focusing the win-loss aspect of some of the activities like the Lego tower. Do you have a recommendation for how to redirect back to the actual meaning of the lesson? That is such a great question, especially if you're working with a child who is 7 years old or younger. When you're doing some of the activities that are competitive, it can be really, really difficult for your child not to focus on the competitive nature of the activity and go back to the actual to the actual lesson. I actually learned this in my own teaching, that the first time, like when I did the Lego activity with my own students the first time, I didn't give them an option of who was going to choose a firm base and who wasn't. I just chose it myself, and I did it ahead of time. And then some of the students, their towers fell over because they didn't have a firm base, and nobody learned anything because they were so upset about the Lego tower falling down. So what I would explain at the beginning of any lesson like that, if there's going to be a competition, to say, okay, there's going to be somebody that's going to win this one. There's going to be somebody that's going to lose this one. Okay, how are we going to respond? What are we going to do if we win? Okay, and talk about being a fair winner. What are we going to do if we lose? Talk about being a fair loser. Now, you might have a child who competition, maybe your 6-year-old competition is one of his or her strengths, that this is a strength that God has given him or her, but then just the fallen nature of that is that he or she has a difficult time moving on. So with that, if you know that your child or both of your children or all of your children or one of your children is really going to have a difficult time with the competitive nature of things, what you can do is you can plan to do that lesson up to the point of the competition and do the competition. Okay, do the competition, then, like you can kind of debrief, and then you can plan a break, whether it's, your child best, whether it's going to be a half-hour break, maybe you go out and you play in the backyard for a half hour, or maybe you go and just build some Legos again, like see who can build different types of crafts. Just take a little bit of a break so that there's time for the emotions to deflate. And then once there's not that strong emotional reaction, then come back and finish the lesson. Now, for some children, it might just be, they might just need to be able to run around outside for 15 to 30 minutes to be able to come down emotionally. For other children, you know your child the best. You might need a little bit extra time. And so you can say, okay, we're going to finish this lesson up tomorrow. Okay. And so the next day you can come back to that. So that's such a great question, because God has designed our children to be emotional beings. And sometimes when they feel very strongly, if there's a competition going on, just if we can anticipate that it's going to be difficult for some of them to come back down for that, again, just leave some time, whether it's just 15 or 30 minutes, or whether you know that you need to come back to this lesson the next day or maybe a few days later. That's a great question. Okay, next, I have one child and we're doing this at home. How do we do the games? How have you seen people teach this? Okay, so the games, some of the games, if you need, this is another great question. So some of the games, you need 2 people to be partners for the games. Like some of the games, there's supposed to be some words on the screen, and then one person says the words to the other person, and the other person, the person facing the screen, okay, is looking at the words and is describing them to the other person. And the person with their back facing the screen is supposed to guess what the concept is. So obviously, if it's just you and your child, you're working together and you're not competing against anyone else. So then it's like, okay, how do we turn this into a competition? What I would suggest, if it's a game where it's a partner game, okay, so it's you and your child working against no one, what I would suggest is that you turn it into a race against time. So you say, okay, so Elizabeth told us that there's going to be 5 words up on the screen. Okay, for this first round, let's see, can we describe and guess all of these 5 words in under 2 minutes? Okay, and so set a goal for yourself. See if you can get it under 2 minutes. And let's say that you do it in like 1 minute and 46 seconds. Like, all right, you beat the clock. Well, then I've given another round and say, okay, so Elizabeth told us there's going to be 5 more words in this round. Last time we did it in 1 minute and 47 seconds. Do you think we can do it in 1.5 minutes? Okay, and so just try to challenge yourselves so that there's actually some competition going on and you're actually racing, but even if there's nobody else in the room to race against, that you're racing against time. So that would be my recommendation for the partner activities, like where it's 2. If it's a game where it's just one-on-one and your child is going to be working on something and then you're going to be the person racing against them, just recommend, obviously, you don't want your more intelligent right now than your child. And so things are going to come more easily to you. So I'm not saying let them win, but obviously try to match your level with theirs. So you can do that. If you want to, you can even, if you're thinking, you know what, like we can even wait, you can wait until a spouse comes home if you want to add a third person in. And that can be a great thing. Like if you want 3 people to be in the competition, if your spouse isn't there when you're doing this and he or she comes home, you can have your child explain the lesson concepts to your spouse before playing the game. And then that's just even better because now your child has just had the opportunity to pull out the important information mentally from the lesson and then verbalize it. And anytime that we have to pull out important information and then say it in our own words, we're doing so much learning. So that would be my recommendation. If it's just if it's a partner activity, race against the clock and try to see if you can beat your time. If it's just a one-on-one activity, I would recommend, just racing against your child, or you can wait until your spouse comes home, or you can include somebody else in that just to make it a little more competitive. Good question so far. Okay, next, since my girls are older, soon to be 11 and 12, we are doing careful thinking. So I'm wondering if the curriculum assumes some understanding of the language used, like knowledge bridge or the various logic laws that they have not had any experience with yet. So that's a good question. So in both curriculums, there's a lot of new words that are explained. And so this is talking about the careful thinking one where we use words like knowledge bridge. Well, just so you know, we here at Foundation, we made up that term, knowledge bridge, because we just wanted to give a helpful analogy for the kids to be able to think through what does it mean to actually believe that something is true. So depending on where you are in the units, the knowledge bridge is going to be built upon in every unit. So if you're in unit 1 or unit 2 and you've only gone over the concept of a knowledge bridge a few times, it might still seem pretty confusing. However, by the time you get to units 3, units 4, units 5, then it's much easier because they've had so much exposure to that concept. Now, with the question of the laws of logic, now, the laws of logic, your children may not have had any formal experience with the laws of logic, like they may never have studied logic before, which is actually what we assume in this curriculum. We assume that the majority of children going through the curriculum will have had no formal training in critical thinking, in the laws of logic, in logical fallacies. That's what we assume, where we know there might be a few kids that go through it that already have some experience. And so as we go through the laws of logic at the beginning, like in unit 2, it's going to seem difficult because it's a new concept. Like the first law of logic that we go through, the law of identity, where we say something is what it is and it's not something else. That's a lot of words for a 10-year-old to go through. That's a lot of words for him or her to understand. But the activities that we include, we try to make it really clear what that law is. And again, this is going back to that review portion, that yes, we're going to introduce a law of logic in one lesson, and then we're going to show how it applies in the real world in the next lesson. But we're not just going to leave it there and forget about it. In every single unit following, we're going to continue to review and review and review and review. So it should be that as we review, it becomes really evident to your child what these concepts are. Now, every once in a while, because God designs all of us differently, and because we have all the different gifts and abilities, and we also have timetables in our different timing in our growth and our maturity, if you've ever purchased a curriculum and you're thinking this is just not the right fit for my child, if you've purchased like the comparative worldview one and you're thinking, this is just talking down too much to my child, I should have gone to the careful thinking one. Or if you're thinking, I bought the careful thinking one, I should have gone to the comparative worldview one. You can always reach out to our organization. You can just submit a help request if you go to foundationworldview.com and sign into your account, or you can just email info@foundationworldview.com and you can just kind of explain why you think the curriculum you purchased might not be the best fit for your child and ask if you can switch over your license to the other one. So good question right there. Okay, next question. Will a recording of this webinar be available to listen to these tips again? I would especially appreciate examples of good questions to ask for each lesson? So the answer to your question is yes, we are recording this session and it will be available. You'll receive an email either later on today or tomorrow, just with the link to the recording so that you can go back and so that you can watch this again and again and again, however many times you need. Just like me and my Dyson, I go back and I watch the Dyson video about how to correctly dust my blinds to make sure that I'm using it to the best of its ability. So yes, the recording will be available. And as you start to practice asking some of these questions, it will become more and more natural. So as you ask questions, as you're thinking through, okay, so we just went through the law of identity. We just saw that something is what it is and it's not something else. Now, the purpose of this, if you've gone through some of the other lessons, the purpose is we want to help children understand language and how different words in our society have been twisted. How when we talk about love and somebody else talks about love, we might be completely talking past one another because we might be using the definition that love is doing what is best for someone else, sacrificing of ourselves to do what is best for someone else. Or someone else might be using the definition that love is making someone feel good, whether or not what you're doing aligns with truth. And so if we're both talking about love, but we're talking about different concepts, we're talking past one another. So that's why we give the law of logic, the law of identity there. And so a great question, just when you're thinking about that, you can just take an activity that we did where we actually have them look at an object and we find the exact same object, like an apple is an apple. It's not something else. You can even turn it into a joke or into a game. Like when you're cooking dinner together, you can be talking about like, okay, this pepper is a pepper. It's not what, and just play a game. What is this pepper not? But then talk about it as words as well. When you go up to a stop sign, okay, that sign says stop. What does it mean? It means that I am supposed to cease from moving. I need to put my foot on the brake so that our car or our van or our truck does not move anymore. And so, okay, so that stop sign is a stop sign and it's not something else. So just taking what's learned in each lesson, just thinking of one or two questions or just activities like that where you can just kind of play a game and follow up with what you're doing. Okay, next question. And I think as of right now, this next question I'm getting to is our last one. So if you have any other questions that are burning that you really want to ask, or if you have a story that you would like to share, please make sure you're putting it in now. Okay, so this question says, for planning/scheduling purposes, how long should we give, or how long would each lesson take? That's a great question. So we say to budget between 45 minutes and an hour, that's how long an average lesson should take. Now, depending on your child or your children and their development, how many questions they ask, how fast they can read, different things like that. Some lessons might only take you a half hour. Okay, if you have a child that's a really fast reader, okay, doesn't ask many questions, it might only take you a half hour. Or if you have a child that might be a little bit of a slower reader, or a child that's a really deep thinker and wants to ask lots of deep questions. Or if you have somebody that's an artist, we do a lot of drawing in the curriculum, which I'll explain in a minute. But we do a lot of drawing. And so if you have an artist in your family, he or she might take a lot more time with the drawing, and it might take an hour to get through the lesson. So we say you're pretty safe if you budget 45 minutes to an hour, depending on your child or your children. It might take that full hour, or it might take a little bit less than the 45 minutes. But that's, in general, that's a good rule of thumb to go through. So if you just block out an hour of time, you should be safe there. Now, one thing I just said is that in the curriculum, or in both curriculums, we include a good amount of drawing. This was not because we couldn't think of anything better to do. And it wasn't because we just want kids to draw cutesy pictures. With the way that our brains work, is our brains think a lot in language, okay? And we speak a lot in language. So when we ask a child to take a concept that they just learned through language, that they learned linguistically, and then we ask them to draw a picture or a symbol to represent that concept, what we're doing is we're actually stimulating a different region of their brain, because now they're having to think of something not in language terms, but in picture terms. So the fancy educational jargon for that is it's a non-linguistic representation. But basically what it means, it's some kind of picture or symbol that doesn't require language. So again, whenever we ask them to draw something, please don't skip over that part, because it's not just a cutesy little artsy activity. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is we really want to develop comprehension. So when we ask a child to draw something, we're stimulating different regions of his or her brain, and we're forcing them to take something that they learned linguistically and now represent it pictorially. So they're going to have such a deeper understanding of the concept when they're required to think in that way. So that was just another little tip, free of charge. Okay, I see one more question has come in. Also, before I answer this next question, something that I wanted to let you know is something that we have decided to do here at Foundation Worldview is we wanted to make sure that you are really well supported and in community as you're going through this curriculum. And we know that you might be the only person or the only family that you know that's going through these materials with your child. So what we've done is we've created a private Facebook group for families that are using Foundation Comparative Worldview curriculum or Foundation Careful Thinking curriculum. So the purpose of the group will be a place for you to go, for you to ask questions of others and say, hey, you know, I'm not exactly sure how to do this with my child. Has anybody else done this? What did you find? Or even for a place for you to share your success, to be like, oh my goodness, my child understood this. Or we were at the movies yesterday and my child understood what worldview was present. Or we were watching this show and this commercial came on and my child understood the mistaken careful thinking that was there. So a place for you to celebrate successes with others, to also ask questions and to get creative ideas from others of things that they've done as they've implemented the materials. So that link will be coming out in the chat here live, and we'll also email it out later so that you can just click on that and then you can apply to join that private Facebook group. Okay, next question that came in. I have a 7 and 10-year-old. We're going through Foundation Worldview. It seems like my 10-year-old knows many of the concepts already, but my 7-year-old is just really thinking about the concepts. How do you use the curriculum with kids at 2 different places? Excellent question. And this is one of the reasons why I said you as a family have such an advantage over those who are using this in a church or in a school setting. Because even though in a school setting, all of the children are usually the same age, you can have such varying abilities in one single classroom, and having varying abilities among 27 children is a lot more than just having varying abilities among 2, 3, 4 children. So that's a great question that I would say have different expectations for them. So know that your 10-year-old, okay, some of this is going to be review for him or her, and he or she's going to get this very quickly. And so you might not have to spend as much time with your 10-year-old as you have to spend with your 7-year-old. So just have different expectations. Know that your 7-year-old, some of the concepts he or she isn't going to fully understand because of the age level, just because I applaud you for starting at 7. So really we've designed these materials to be for 8 on up, but if you're starting at 7, that's a great thing because you can just start building this foundation earlier, but just modify your expectations just as you would with something like a chore around the house. You know, if you are asking your 10-year-old to sweep the kitchen, your expectation of what the results of that will look like are going to be different than the expectations of asking your 7-year-old to sweep the kitchen. Just have different expectations. The other thing, now this is going to depend on both of your children's personalities because you know them best and you know whether this would work or whether this wouldn't work. But one thing that if this would work with your children's personalities that you can do is actually asking your 10-year-old to help your 7-year-old. Now, his or her response is going to be really based on how you present this, not like, I want you to help your brother, I want you to help your sister, but actually taking your 10-year-old aside and saying, you know what, I've noticed as we've gone through these Foundation Worldview lessons, you have understood everything so quickly. God has given you such a smart mind. I am so impressed. And you know what? Since your brother or since your sister is a little bit younger than you know what? She's not understanding this quite as much as you are. He's not understanding this quite as much as you are. You know, do you think maybe there's some ways in which you could help him or her understand? Like, what are some things during a lesson where you might be able to help your brother understand this a little more? And then talk through ideas. If you give the older child some options, so it's not like you're placing an extra responsibility on him or her, but instead you're saying, hey, I need your help. I need your help. And I think because you're so smart, you could really be very, very helpful to your younger sibling in this. So if you give your child an opportunity to talk through ways like, yeah, I think I could help him by doing this, or yeah, I think I could help her by doing that, and say, oh, that's great. I think that's a great idea. When we go through the lesson next week, would you be able to do that? I could really use your help with that. So if you could utilize your older child's natural gifting to really help your younger child, that could be wonderful. And then the way that you frame it for your younger child, okay, again, the way we frame things for kids is so important. So if you can say, you know what, like, let's just say your older child's name is, my oldest nephew's name is Brady. So we'll say, let's say your child's name is Brady. You know what, today, as we go through this lesson, Brady's going to help you with some of the reading and with some of the summarizing. Isn't that so great that God has given you a big brother who's so helpful? He just loves you so much that he loves working with you. So the way that we frame these things for our kids can also be really helpful in getting them to participate and to be involved in this. So that's a great question. So that is all the questions that we have for right now. So in a minute, we'll wrap up, but I'm just so grateful that you took the time today out of your schedule to focus on what you're doing with Foundation and the curriculums that you've purchased. And I just really want to commend you, because not everyone understands the value of equipping our kids to think well. And so it's obvious that God has given you a real understanding of what your children need in this world in which they're growing up. So I just want to commend you really for seeing that need, but not only seeing that need, but then also taking some action steps to go and meet that need. I just know that God is going to bless your efforts because you're following him in this. Now, this doesn't mean God's blessing doesn't mean that everything's going to go perfectly or exactly as we plan. But we know, okay, that God never wastes anything that we are investing in his kingdom, even if we can't see the results right away. Now, just as a little heads up and reminder, on December 2nd at 1 p.m. Central, that's going to be our next public webinar where anyone will be able to come to that. And we did a webinar this month in November on equipping our kids to navigate false ideas. And so on the 2nd of December, we're going to have the second part of that. So we're going to go through some tips and tricks for equipping our kids to navigate false ideas. And then a few months later in 2022, on February 2nd, again at noon, we're going to have another just private webinar just for those of you who hold these family licenses, to talk through some more tips and tricks to be able to answer your questions, to share some of your stories. And then finally on February 22nd, this is going to be a little later in the day at 3 p.m. Central. I'm really excited. We have Jay Warner Wallace, who's going to come on our webinar, and he's going to be talking through equipping our kids to understand the reliability of Scripture. So talking through what are some things we can do with our children to help them understand that Scripture is true, that it's an accurate recording of historical events, especially regarding the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So thank you so much for giving up your time today and investing it in this way. Again, you'll be receiving a link for that private Facebook group to just connect with others who are using the materials. And as always, if you have any further questions or things that you would like help with, when you sign into your Foundation account, you can just click on the little customer support tab and get some support there. Or you could always just email info@foundationworldview.com. It's my prayer that as we go forth from here today, that God would continue to equip you to disciple these children that he has placed in your care, and that they would understand the truth of the Christian worldview, and that they would know and love and seek Jesus all the days of their life. Thanks so much for joining me today.